December 2008, the man who promised safety had built one of the greatest lies in financial history. Outside his luxury apartment in Manhattan, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Investors stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Retirement funds vanished overnight. Charities collapsed. Families lost everything they had spent decades building. At the center of the storm stood Bernard Madoff, a man once celebrated as a financial genius, a trusted Wall Street icon, now accused of orchestrating a fraud so massive that the damage stretched across continents. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. Billions of dollars gone, thousands of victims betrayed, a reputation built over decades destroyed in a matter of days. For years, Madoff had lived the American dream. He sat at the top of Wall Street, moved among the rich and powerful, and convinced the world that he possessed a secret formula for endless profits. But behind the elegant suits, the exclusive clubs, and the image of success, something far darker was hiding. A secret so enormous that when it finally came crashing down, it shook the entire financial world. How did a lifeguard from a middle-class family become one of the most respected men in finance? Why did brilliant investors, banks, and regulators trust him without question? And what was really happening behind the spotlight while the world was applauding his success? To understand the greatest financial betrayal of a generation, we have to rewind to the beginning. Long before his name became synonymous with scandal, Bernard Madoff was the son of a middle-class family in Queens, New York. He wasn't born into wealth or Wall Street royalty. As a teenager, he worked odd jobs, installing sprinkler systems, lifeguarding at local beaches, doing whatever he could to save money. While others dreamed about glamorous careers, Madoff dreamed about building something of his own. In 1960, armed with only a few $1,000s he had earned from summer jobs and small savings, he launched a tiny investment firm. There was no grand office, no army of employees, no famous clients waiting at the door. Just ambition, relentless confidence, and an uncanny ability to understand what people wanted. At a time when Wall Street was still dominated by old traditions, Madoff embraced new technology and modern trading methods. His company grew rapidly as markets evolved, and he positioned himself at the center of the transformation. The breakthrough came gradually, then all at once. As his firm became one of the largest market makers on Wall Street, Madoff's reputation soared. Investors admired his consistency. Industry leaders respected his innovation. Regulators viewed him as a trusted insider. He wasn't just another financier. He looked approachable, calm, measured. He rarely boasted or chased publicity. Instead, he cultivated an image of quiet competence, the kind of man who seemed too successful to need attention. And people loved him for it. Clients felt safe with him. Wealthy families entrusted him with their fortunes. Charities believed he shared their values. Friends described him as loyal and generous. The more successful he became, the more untouchable he seemed. His rise embodied a story people desperately wanted to believe, that hard work beats privilege, that intelligence beats luck, that an ordinary kid from Queens could climb to the summit of Wall Street and stay there. By the 1990s, Bernard Madoff wasn't just successful. He was a symbol of stability in an unpredictable world. Every year brought the same promise: steady returns, no drama, no failures, almost too perfect. And that's when the questions should have started. Because somewhere along the way, reality had begun to bend around the legend. The image of Bernard Madoff was becoming more important than the truth. And behind that flawless facade, something dangerous was quietly taking shape. By the early 2000s, Bernard Madoff seemed to have achieved something almost impossible. He wasn't just rich, he wasn't just respected, he was untouchable. His name carried weight in every corner of Wall Street. Investors whispered about his extraordinary consistency with a mixture of admiration and envy. Wealthy families competed for the chance to invest with him. Getting into Bernard Madoff's circle felt less like opening an account and more like receiving an invitation to an exclusive club, and exclusivity only made the legend grow. Madoff lived a life that looked straight out of a movie: a luxurious penthouse overlooking Manhattan, a sprawling estate in Palm Beach where ocean waves crashed against private shores, a mansion in the south of France surrounded by vineyards and sunshine. His yachts sliced through crystal blue water as guests sipped champagne under golden sunsets. Elegant dinners stretched late into the night. Conversations flowed effortlessly between financiers, celebrities, philanthropists, and social elites. Everything about his world radiated confidence. The tailored suits, the polished smile, the calm voice that never seemed rattled. Even during market crashes, when fear spread across Wall Street like wildfire, Madoff appeared immune. His clients kept receiving steady returns, year after year, month after month. No surprises, no bad news, just results. To many, he wasn't merely an investor. He was proof that certainty existed in an uncertain world. His influence extended beyond money. He served as chairman of the NASDAQ stock market, advised industry leaders, and moved comfortably among the most powerful figures in finance. If Bernard Madoff said something, people listened. If Bernard Madoff promised something, people believed him. And perhaps that was the most intoxicating illusion of all. Because success can make people admire you. But perfection? Perfection makes people stop asking questions. The more flawless Madoff appeared, the more impossible it became to imagine him failing. No one wanted to believe that the man who seemed to have mastered risk could be hiding any secrets at all. Yet beneath the polished image, beneath the luxury homes and endless praise, tiny cracks were beginning to form. Invisible at first, easy to ignore. But every empire built on illusion faces the same question eventually. What happens when reality finally catches up? And for Bernard Madoff, that moment was closer than anyone could imagine. For years, Bernard Madoff's world seemed immune to doubt. On the surface, nothing had changed. Clients still praised him, the money still flowed. His offices remained calm, elegant, and reassuring. A stark contrast to the chaos that often defined Wall Street. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding. The pressure had always been there. Every month, investors expected returns. Every year, they expected the impossible, consistency in a world built on uncertainty. And Madoff kept delivering, too perfectly. Some outsiders began to notice. Independent analysts scratched their heads. Rival financiers whispered among themselves. A few critics asked uncomfortable questions. How could one man produce such steady profits regardless of whether markets soared or crashed? Where was the volatility? Where was the risk? The numbers didn't seem to obey the laws of finance. Yet whenever doubts surfaced, they disappeared just as quickly. Madoff's reputation protected him. People trusted the image they had spent decades believing. After all, this was Bernard Madoff, former chairman of NASDAQ, a respected pioneer, a philanthropist. Surely someone so admired couldn't be hiding something so devastating. But admiration has a dangerous side. It can silence skepticism. And inside Madoff's empire, the burden of maintaining perfection was growing heavier. Each success created a new expectation. Each promise demanded another promise. The machine couldn't slow down. It couldn't admit weakness. It couldn't fail. Because failure wasn't merely financial anymore. It would destroy the image. The legend, the carefully crafted identity that had become larger than the man himself. As financial markets grew more turbulent in the mid-2000s, the pressure intensified. Clients wanted reassurance. Investors demanded access to their money. Questions that had once been faint whispers became impossible to ignore. And somewhere behind the polished offices and confident smiles, Madoff knew a terrifying truth. His empire wasn't built to survive scrutiny. Publicly, he remained composed. Privately, the walls were closing in. The man who had spent decades mastering appearances was about to face the one thing appearances could never control: reality. The only question left was, how much longer could Bernard Madoff wear the mask before the entire world watched it fall? December 2008. The illusion finally shattered. After years of projecting absolute confidence, Bernard Madoff called his sons into his apartment and confessed a truth almost too shocking to comprehend. The investment business that had made him a Wall Street legend was, in his own words, one big lie. Within hours, his sons reported him to authorities. The next morning, federal agents arrived. The man who had spent decades being admired was led away in handcuffs. News spread across the world like wildfire. Bernard Madoff, the trusted financier, the former NASDAQ chairman, the man entrusted with billions of dollars, had orchestrated one of the largest investment frauds in history. The fallout was immediate and merciless. Investors logged into accounts only to discover that fortunes they believed existed never had. Retirees lost their life savings. Charities were forced to close. Families who had trusted Madoff for generations faced financial ruin. The losses reached into the tens of billions of dollars. Shock quickly turned to rage. Victims demanded answers. How could regulators have missed it? How had banks, auditors, and experienced investors failed to see what was hiding in plain sight? Lawsuits flooded the courts. Investigators searched for assets. Friends distanced themselves. Former admirers spoke his name with disbelief. Everything Madoff had spent nearly half a century building collapsed in a matter of days. Then came the personal devastation. His wife, once part of New York's elite social circles, became isolated. His family was thrust into the center of a scandal they never escaped. Relationships fractured under the weight of shame and public scrutiny. The empire was gone. The mansions, the yachts, the exclusive reputation, all of it seized, sold, or stained beyond repair. In 2009, Bernard Madoff pleaded guilty to multiple federal crimes and was sentenced to 150 years in prison. The sentence was severe, but for many victims, no punishment could restore what had been stolen. Money can sometimes be recovered. Trust rarely can. The man who once symbolized certainty had become a warning, a reminder that charisma is not character, that reputation is not proof, and that the brightest empires can cast the darkest shadows. The world had watched Bernard Madoff rise. The world had watched him fall. But after the headlines fade, after the fortune disappears, after the empire turns to dust, what remains of the man who built it all on a lie? There would be no comeback, no triumphant interview, no second act. For Bernard Madoff, the collapse wasn't the end of his career. It was the end of his identity. In prison, the man who once commanded billions lived a life stripped of luxury and influence. The penthouses were gone. The yachts were gone. The endless stream of admirers had disappeared. All that remained was time. Time to replay decades of choices. Time to watch his name become synonymous with betrayal. Time to confront a legacy he could no longer control. Madoff spent his final years behind bars, far removed from the glittering world he once ruled. In 2021, he died in federal prison at the age of 82. The financial empire he built was gone, but the damage remained. Investigators and trustees spent years recovering money for victims. Families tried to rebuild lives shattered by trust, misplaced. Some recovered a portion of their losses. Many never recovered their faith. Today, Bernard Madoff is remembered not as a visionary investor or a Wall Street pioneer. He is remembered as a warning. Business schools teach his story. Documentaries dissect his deception. Regulators cite his case as proof that reputation can become a shield behind which danger hides. His rise was extraordinary. His fall was catastrophic. And his legacy? A paradox. Because for decades, he represented everything people aspire to become: successful, respected, admired. Then, almost overnight, he came to represent everything they fear: deception, greed, and the fragility of trust. The silence surrounding his name today is striking. No applause, no glamorous headlines, only echoes. Echoes of a man who seemed larger than life. Echoes of fortunes that vanished. Echoes of a lesson learned far too late, that greatness built on illusion is never greatness at all. And yet, there is one question his story leaves behind. If a single lie can erase a lifetime of achievement, can a person who has destroyed so much ever be redeemed? Or are some mistakes so profound that redemption itself becomes impossible? Bernard Madoff is gone. His empire is gone. But the forces that created his rise are still with us. The hunger for success, the temptation to trust appearances, the desire to believe that someone, somewhere, has discovered a secret that everyone else has missed. His story isn't just about one man. It's about us, about how easily admiration can become blind faith, how quickly success can silence skepticism, and how dangerous it is when image becomes more important than truth. For decades, Bernard Madoff convinced the world he had beaten the system. In the end, He was consumed by the very illusion he created. Yet the question lingers long after the headlines fade. Because somewhere, in boardrooms, on social media, and behind polished smiles, people are still chasing perfection, still selling certainty, still building empires on stories the world desperately wants to believe. So, as the screen fades to black, ask yourself, was Bernard Madoff's story a warning or a blueprint for survival? And if another Bernard Madoff appeared tomorrow, would we recognize him, or would we trust him all over again?